I will say, like, I looking back, like, I love Teen Time so much, more so because it gave me an opportunity to meet so many incredible people, and I feel like if I wasn't in Teen Times, I wouldn't have met someone like you who has just been so freaking phenomenal, and I just feel so honored to have
Mm,
been in a circle with so many incredible leaders and, like, just disruptors. I'm like, "Yes." But, like, I get wanna know you more, like, especially because, like, after, Teen Times closed and we all, like, go abroad to study, like, we kinda
mhm.
lose touch for a minute, but I wanna, like, know, like, what have you been up to? I absolutely am a huge fan of SayLessSis, like, you have no idea, and I've told you this before, like, how much it has just been so inspiring to me and helping me understand the value of my culture, when I've been abroad for so long and you don't really see Saint Martin culture reflected anywhere, not in Saint
Mm.
Martin, and yeah, like, I'm so curious, like, I guess, like, how was it when you graduated and you moved abroad?
Well, Harsha, I felt like you asked me like three different questions. So I'm gonna break it down. So what I've been up to? No, girl, it's fine. It's fine. So first question was what I've been up to since teen times. So since teen times, I graduated. I did IB. I decided to move to Holland, where I studied European studies. Um, I lived in Holland for 7 years. So with that saying, I had a study delay. But within my study, I did a lot of different things. So I actually wanted to continue what I did in Teen Times, and I joined my studies like magazine called Globetrotters back then. I think I did it for like a year. So it was very similar to how Teen Times was set up. The only difference was that everyone had a pair who you had to write your article with. So for me, that was a bit frustrating because in Teen Times you can write on your own, have your own style, and then you have someone that checks it. Whereas with this one, it felt like a group assignment, and I was like, this is not what I signed up for. But overall, I love the experience of that. And with that, I just continued to do so many different like extracurricular activities. So which I started in St. Martin. So I really tried to maintain that aspect of my life in Holland. So I was also part of like I was one of the founding members of my university's Toastmasters club, which is public speaking. It's not about bread because I know a lot of time people are like, "What is Toastmasters?" So it's a public speaking club. Uh, and I used that as an opportunity as well to network, like you mentioned, and meet so many different people I won't usually encounter on a day to day basis. And especially in Holland, you get to how do you say, like, you meet so many people from different levels, not only students. Like there's like company Toastmaster clubs that we will also join in on certain days or certain months. So that was also fine. What else did I do besides study? I did a lot. I did a shit ton. Like we even had for Irma. I think that was like one of my first St. Martin initiatives that I did back home together with a bunch of different St. Martiners. And for me, I think that's where like my passion for I, I wouldn't say I don't think it started there, but it reignited my passion for philanthropy and really put it in a different light. Because going away, especially from St. Martin, everyone is so quick to say, like, hey, when you, especially going to Holland, they're like, don't mingle too much with St. Martiners. Get out there, meet internationals, da 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 da. I get that. But you see, when there's a point where you're down and low, the only thing you want is your people. And Irma really taught me that. And I don't want to speak for everyone else, but for the few people I know that we had this discussion, they also shared that sentiment as well. So that Irma was a blessing in disguise for those of us abroad, especially in Holland, because we did one of the biggest musical chairs event like in Zuid-Holland, so South Holland, Den Haag area. And we got the opportunity to put St. Martin in such a positive light, and really like that at that moment, so many people knew St. Martin name, they knew St. Martin students. Um, and yeah, that was just amazing. And out of that came friendships with people just like you mentioned earlier, Harsha, people that I went to high school with, but we never spoke to each other for probably petty reasons, or you just never had an opportunity to. But when we had that moment of everyone just being humbled and in the same space of, we don't know what's happening to our island, our family. You make friends. Like, I found myself asking every St. Martin I saw in Holland, like, "Hey, you good?" I don't know them, I don't know their name, but I was like hailing out to them. So yeah, I felt like I said a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny. Like for me, it was like the complete opposite when Irma happened in the United States. Like there was literally nobody on my university campus that gave a damn about my little rock that had just been flattened to the ground. Like I was so lonely. Like it was so like, and it's so weird when like you're around people that are oblivious of like natural disasters, especially like hurricanes, that they just like were unaware. Like they just did not know, did not care. It was the complete opposite. But I think like it is awesome to have like, and one thing that I've always low key been jealous of is like in the Netherlands, at least there is like a small little different pockets of like St. Martin that you can find like with groups of people that in America like there just does not exist. They're like, what is a St. Martiner? They're just like, you're not just a black girl. I'm confused. Like, what's going on?
I mean, no, trust me, in Holland you
It's
get that.
a struggle.
You get that a lot because I think that's kind of leading up to like one of the reasons Lisa and I started SayLessSis. In essence, was because we felt like the representation that we saw in media, especially the Black Dutch media, did not relate to our St. Martin experience or our background. It was either just the Surinamese representation or ABC representation, and then SSS Islands was just like, okay. If you happen to know of, if someone mentions St. Martin, is because maybe they had like a close connection to there, or maybe something's around. Like there's this huge party in Holland called like Soca versus Dancehall. That's where you see like all the St. Martiners link up. That's one of the times you see a lot of St. Martiners together in one place. So then you know, okay, yeah, these are St. Martiners, um or anything related to carnival, really, because you know what, people love carnival. Then you see us come out in bulks, but otherwise to that, girl, it's quite similar. I've been exhausted, so tired of explaining where I'm from. No, I'm not from Curacao. No, I'm not from Suriname or here St. Martin. We are also Dutch, because even to employers as well. Oh my god, girl, you apply for a job, they're like, "Oh, you from St. Martin? So
They're like, what?
do you need a work permit?" I'm like,
Where?
"No, fam. Here's my passport. You colonize me." Like, so, or people asking me like,
Like you forgot about us. I know we're land not utilized, but we here. Like we
"Oh my god,
here.
trust me, it's
That's
ridiculous."
hilarious.
But it's not taught, because eventually over the years I made a few Dutch friends, and I would vent. I'm like, "How do you not know about St. Martin? Y'all colonizers. Like, we have to speak your language, our official documents in Dutch. Like, what do you learn in school?" And they're like, "Nothing. They don't teach us this. They learn about World War I and II and everything else, but their colonial history." So it's a learning process, and now I have
Wow.
like a lot more grace for people that do approach me, because I know, before I used to be a bit more hostile, like, "How can you not know? Like, I know so much about you. Why don't you know so much about me?" But you when you live there and you speak to many different people, you understand. And now, like I mentioned, I have grace, and I just explain them. I have like shortened ways of how I'm going to approach this topic, and we just move on from there. And then I send them to Google if anything, because yeah, sis got other things to do.
I feel I'm just like Bing it, Google it, like that's it's gonna show it to you because most maps ain't even got it.
Hmm.
Like I swear, if Google didn't even have St. Martin on the map, the world wouldn't have even known like we were here. They would have been like, "What? Huh? Who?" Like, I'm always surprised when Americans actually know, like, the island, and, like, I know if they really know, if they know, like, the fact that there's 2 sides to the island. Because I feel like a lot of times, like, when people hear Saint, they're like, "Oh, yeah, like, the Virgin Islands," or, like, it's something, something. But when they're like, "Oh, like, the Dutch or the French," I'm like, "Yes, you know." You know what I am talking about. Like, I know, like, because then most people will just be like, "Oh, like, yeah, she's from Jamaica," and I'm like, "That's not what I said. That's not what I said. That's not even close to what I said." But coolio, cools.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
it wild though that I feel like it's so interesting that these are the countries that like build history, but yet they don't even teach that history
Mhm.
to the like their own like people. Like it's interesting when I came to America and I realized like they only learned American history. They never learned like really world history. And like you're mentioning in the Netherlands, they never really taught them about the colonies that they had. And I feel like we on the island, I don't know if it's because we were, like, so tourism focused and so, like, world focused that we put so much emphasis on world history that, like, we grew up understanding the world's history
Yep.
instead of understanding our own history, which is, like, the complete opposite, and it's so weird, like, it's so weird. I just be,
Yeah,
like,
but for me, when it comes
confused.
to history, I and especially the way how it's taught in different countries, for me, I always feel like that's always like a hidden agenda. I feel like it was meant to be that way in order for you to guide your people in a certain way, you know. So for example, I can understand why the Netherlands never thought or found the importance of teaching their colonial past in schools, because imagine if you started teaching that and you have these little kids coming up asking you, or like, you know, painting this picture that you don't want your own country to be painted in, you know, or asking questions that you don't really feel like answering. So I totally get that. And also from a St. Martin perspective, of course, I feel like it has a lot to do with trying to I'm trying to use my words quite, pick my words here. um
That's okay, take your time.
so I mean, at least for me in the St. Martin context, I kind of see it more as in um when especially like if you notice on SayLessSis, we focus a lot on history, and a lot of the things we post aren't things we were ever taught in school. A lot of it is come from books that my mom, over the years, when she took me to book fairs or someone local wrote a book, she would buy it and it would be put down. And then if that's where I eventually gained the interest of, you know, of reading these books and actually digging into them. And I would be so angry with all the information I would find. Like, why weren't we taught this? You know, I feel like I would have been so much more empowered or stand more firmly in my identity as a St. Martiner. So a lot of the times I felt like it's kind of like a hidden agenda for our government or whoever was in charge back then, especially over education, to really not focus on our St. Martin identity, you know? And I feel like if we really actually implement it in
It's
our schools
wild. It
now,
blows my mind.
I feel like a lot of the issues that a lot of us face when we went away, we would not be facing them because we would have had a better identity to stand on when you know we go out there and we speak about St. Martin or about the things that we want.
100%.
So yeah, it's for me it's just a hidden agenda. Like
A 100%.
the moment I know I observe the history that is taught in certain countries, I'm like, aha, you're up to something. Like that is why it is the way it is. So,
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, why did you pick European studies?
girl, that's a good question. That 18-year-old me probably was like, I just want to leave St. Martin. No, so I've always been a fan of like political science. I really love history. So like in IB, I just had like this natural affinity to history. I honestly don't remember studying, but I just knew when I did the test, I passed and I passed really high. So I was like, At first, I really wanted to study history. But then, of course, with capitalism, I started to Google, okay, how much money can a history teacher make or what can I do with history? And I was like, it's not in line with what I want to do. It's not in line with my financial goals. So I was like, okay, you know, let's see something else. And then I stumbled upon European studies because one, it didn't have math because I'm not a fanatic of math at all. And I found that it was like a perfect blend of
Trust me, I feel you.
I found it was a perfect blend of everything I like. So there was like the history part because in my first year we had a bit of like culture. So but I learned more about like I can't remember much of it now because my first year was years ago. But about Plato's and like all those theories and so on, that history that was really interesting for me. So there was culture, there was languages, so I had to study Spanish and French. There was also the political aspect as well, so really learning about the functioning of the European Union, but also of NGOs. And then there was also the business side of it. So like marketing a little bit, but business management. So I got a bit of everything. And as someone who loves to read a lot, I don't do it as often as I should anymore, which is a pity. But I know if I could do something that doesn't require payment, it's reading. Um, I felt like European studies was it, or is it for me. But yeah, with time too as well, because there's been many people in my study that have also had delays. More so, I've noticed that people of color, so or minorities in my study, majority of them got a delay, a study delay. And I still was trying to figure out the reason why, because I'm someone like if I notice a trend, I'm like, why is this happening? Like the Dutch kids come in, they study, they graduate within a
Yeah.
time frame, and then here's us that are struggling, and I'm like, how what is this factor? And it's not even to say that they're international. These are also, I have friends that look like me that lived in Holland all their life, so they know how to navigate the Dutch culture, unlike us who still was in a learning phase, and they still had certain delays, or struggles with the study. But overall, all of them still managed to graduate. A lot of them are now activists in their own field. They're very public. They are so outspoken, Harsha. Like these are the ones that will go to protests and take the lead. So I'm so proud of the friends that I've made throughout my college years. But yeah, that's the long reason of why I chose European studies.
Interesting. I always feel like it's interesting when you think about like how these great nations like tell their story. You know what I mean? Because a lot of it I agree is like they want to create like this image of a great nation. And you like I think oftentimes like when you're like, "Oh, I want to talk about all the good stuff." You're like, "Okay, maybe we should just neglect all the naughty stuff we did so that our people don't feel like they come from shitty people when it's like you made your bed, you might as well lay in it. So, like, why we trying to pretend like there's not corpses in the closet? Like, they eventually finna rot and we gonna smell it. So it's like you're hiding, but we still see you. Like, it's like we didn't forget. And I think it's so interesting, like how you talk about that because now when I think about like the fact that we didn't learn our history and we didn't learn our culture, it almost seems as though it was like intentional. Like they didn't want to be held accountable for the role that they played in the destruction of a people. Even though like we can argue St. Martin was, it wasn't an island for anything for the longest a while until these European powers were like, I need to conquer. Let me go out and conquer. And they're like, oh, nobody's conquered this rock. I'm a put my stake in it and say it belongs to me. Not really thinking about what does that do to the groups of people that are then brought to this rock and have to endure a life there, not understanding the context in which all of these decisions were made and how they then influence like our identity as people that are now like the future generations of that colony that was brought about by these European powers. And it's like I understand like not wanting to feel bad for all the people that you killed, but it's like, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't have killed them then, Like I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like you want me to not make you feel bad for the shitty things you did. Like maybe I'm sure the people that you killed would have loved to have been alive, but here they are, dead in the ground. So it's like We just go and pretend like you and it's so funny, like, even now when I look at, like, the war, I'm like, it's so funny when I feel like America and like all of these great nations like to point fingers as like who is the bad guy and who is the good guy. And I'm like, you all have blood on your hands. Every single one of you have blood on your hands, and you just go sit there on your high horse and pretend like we we killed innocent people who were just living their life, and then y'all decided to start all this tra la la, and now people, innocent people, gotta pay, and then you're gonna sit on your high house and be like, we didn't kill anybody, but you're bad. You're the bad one. When it's like, no, you all have bloods on your hand. And but it's interesting because I feel like the role of the media is so important in capturing those narratives. And I even see now, like in like the Ukraine Russian war, how the media is painting this picture of these great nations, and it's so like manipulative, like it's so like not the holistic perspective. And I often think like, what does all of this do to manipulate a people to act in a certain way or to like have certain prejudices against other groups based on like the stories that people have of these great nations? As I like see how the media manipulates people and like they create these false narratives to kind of like sugarcoat reality. You see how like people start to like identify with these ideas of
Yep.
patriotism that are actually like false and like significantly misleading. And it's like a weird privilege that people have because like a lot of the civilized like the citizens of these great nations are so far removed from the war and the terror that their countries bestow on like developing nations, just because they can. And it's so interesting that like they take that as like something to be proud of, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, we have the strongest army that goes out and kills tons of innocent people, but it's because we're part of this great nation and we're fighting for democracy, so it's justified. And I'm like, that sounds a lot like the church when they were killing Muslims because it's justified for God. And I'm like, how is killing ever okay? I'm like, I don't understand. But it's like when you understand the history, which so many people don't actually understand
Mhm.
human history fundamentally. And I sometimes think like we're kind of lucky and unlucky in the sense that St. Martin did put so much emphasis on us studying world history that we actually look at the world, I feel like, a lot differently than everybody else looks at the world. Like they don't actually see all of these connections, and we're just like on this little island like just watching this ping pong match going across like the Atlantic, and we're just like, are you guys seeing this? Cuz like we're seeing this like
Girl, I couldn't agree more. I definitely agree with that. Like even for now when it comes to the Ukraine Russian war, I honestly have kept my remarks to myself because like you mentioned, what is shown in media, it's so skewed, you know? It's like they're just doing it, especially when I see like my grandparents watching CNN and then BBC, and I'm like, guys, they're just doing it from their perspective. This is not the total picture. You know, and when you hear certain people have their arguments, and I'm like, ugh, it didn't start today. It did not start in 2022. This started years ago. And if you really go back and like you mentioned, look at the history of all of these great nations, you would realize, okay, like you mentioned, they all have blood on their hands. They're literally using Ukraine as a proxy right now, which is
it's so sad. It's so sad. It's so sad to see cuz I'm like I'm watching it, and like because I've studied history so much, I'm like, I wait, we seen this type of behavior before. I'm like, where did we see this? Oh, it was the World War II. And I'm just like, guys, I'm seeing red flags. Like I'm seeing red flags. Like I'm seeing a lot of red flags, and I'm like, and it's so weird that the media is like creating this sort of like fear and like they're the bad guy and they're doing this wrong and we got to stop them and it's not fair. We're going to impose sanctions on them. But it's like who actually pays the price for all of that? Individual people that didn't do nothing wrong, that are just minding their own business. And I'm just like, "Oh
literally.
my god. Oh my god."
Yeah. Yes, it's yeah.
And I just sit here like a Gen Z and they wonder like why you have anxiety and stress. I'm like, do you see the world that we are in? I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, y'all are so delusional. And like, you think I'm the crazy one. I'm like, y'all don't even know what's going on, but I'm the crazy one. Okay. It making sense. Oh, but, like, I will say, like, Say Less Sis has been, like, my awakening. Like, I am so like, I you know how many a times I have told you, and I will tell you this till the end of time, like, because you understood that value, you and Lisa, and you, like I remember the first time I heard your first podcast and just hearing, like, St. Maarten voices and, like, slang, like, it felt like coming home. It was like my siren call. I was like, "Where has this been all my life?"
Oh, girl, I'm glad that we had that effect on you because that's what we were aiming for. So,
I'm like, the last time I heard Boobaloops was like like when I had Boobaloops, you know what I mean? Like like I was like, I have never I'm like, it has been so long since I've read Kunamunu, and it's like when you read it and you hear it in your head, like you just laugh because it reminds you of all the memories of like in childhood of like when people would say these things, and like
yeah,
you don't realize how important that is to your identity. And like you guys are doing the Lord's work, I swear, because I don't know where I will be without y'all. I swear. I just be sitting
girl.
here all lost and confused.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I'm gonna pass the message on to Lisa as well. But yeah, I'm happy because honestly, like Celeste's was birthed out of our friendship. Like I mentioned earlier, we did not see any representation of ourselves, but more so from a cultural background. And then we were like, Lisa, let me tell you how it started. So Lisa, back way when, like, I guess 2017, 2018, it's been a while. Um, she was a fanatic of podcasts. Like she would listen to podcasts, she would send them to me, yada dee. And then eventually I got more into it. And then I remember her mentioning, like, like it would be cool to, do podcasting because Lisa studied like international media and communication. So it was really like up her alley in that regard to creativity and all the stuff that comes in that field. So for Christmas, I was like, I'm gonna buy her a mic because I'm gonna put her out there because I know like she's someone like she just needs that extra push, And I was like, I'm gonna be that person. So I bought her this mic for Christmas. But my intention of buying the mic was for her to do the podcast. I didn't have any intention of being on this podcast. She's like, oh, great. So we're recording together. And I was like, what?
Like, no, sis, that was for you. That was for you.
But, I was like, fine, we're going to do this. So we literally like we listen to different podcasts, not podcasting, we listen to many different podcasts. Back then, this is for kids who are older than 18. So one of my favorite podcasts was like Horrible Decisions. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but I just love how out there they were. Like they I love anything that goes against the grain. I like I like things that like creates conversation that you
Same
don't you
here.
don't hear every day. And I felt like,
A rebel
yes,
energy.
and I was
Yes.
like, yeah, I like this. So like they like I mean, our content, of course, did not consist of that because, again, when you come from a small community, there are certain things you have to keep to yourself because you could easily touch a button on
Some
so many
nerves.
people.
I feel you.
Yeah, so we try to take it more
I'm like, if
from.
I touched a button, that means you need healing.
Yeah, yes, sis. But a lot of people don't understand that. So, we really try to focus more on like the topics that we were interested in. So, I mean, we have like 4 or 5 podcast episodes, which honestly we were not consistent about because life came at us quite quickly after starting.
I loved every single one. Every single
um,
one.
But yeah, it forces us to really to not only look at certain topics from our perspective, because before we just speak from our opinion, sometimes you would have to sit down and actually research different topics, or like see what others are saying about it before we can actually sit down and have a proper conversation. Because again, although it's from a St. Martin perspective, you do want to be educated, you do want to be open-minded while having a conversation. So yeah, that's how it started. And it went from podcasting to series to doing the Instaton that we did. And then we had the slangs. And I must say, everything, I love the fact that our platform, we're not afraid to try different things, like that's why we stayed away from, we dropped the podcast name and just have it to the SayLessSis brand, because that's how we see ourselves, as just like we house many different things. Like if we want to go back to podcast in the future, we can, and it ties into what we represent. um if we want to go into more video creation, that kind of content creation, we easily can do that. So we really now see ourselves more as a brand, and with the flexibility of just being open to trying many different concepts as possible. And I love that whatever we do, we have this. So we don't, and to be honest, we don't do it and see, boy, let's see what numbers we get. Like, we don't do that. We just plan something, think it's cool, and put it out there and just let it go with the grace of God and see, like, will people like this? Will they not? And thankfully, a lot of people love it. And we are super, 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 super grateful for everyone that supports us. I think one of the highlights for me from SayLessSis since starting was our picnic. So we had this link up picnic, and it the idea kind of came to me because I was in the student association in Holland before leaving. um and I noticed, like, we planned a picnic as one. I was like, wow, everyone was having a good time. I was like, I wish I could see my St. Maarten people in this light as well. So I pitched the idea, and also to Charlotte. Shout out to Charlotte. She's also comes in clutch when it comes to event planning. um I pitched it to Charlotte, and she didn't hesitate to jump on board, and to just see that, just from a simple thought, how it just blossomed into something so beautiful. But for me, what really, like, really impacted us, like when we sat down and reflected on how that event went, was that, you know especially in our community, a lot of time you get support only online. Like, oh, we love this girl, we love you. You get the likes, you get the comments, you get this. But when it's like time for you to actually physically be there and support, cricket, cricket, cricket. You don't hear anything. And the fact that we had a picnic, and I think, to be counted, I don't want to lie, it was between, like, I think it was like 75 people that showed up, and everyone had a good time. And it was from many, like, different friend groups, different cliques. Like, we got to meet new people that came from like an hour, 2 hours away. There were people telling us they stayed over by a friend in the city where we hosted a picnic by, so they could easily just travel and come. And I was like, this meant so much, like the investment, and people just being happy, and the pictures that came out of it too. For me, I was like, oh my god, my people are so beautiful. Like, I wish we could, like, show our people in that light so much more. But yeah, that for me was like one of the best feelings I've had. And I really hope that we can continue it here, and I hope we will. It's more so about, again, readjusting, because, as you know, Lisa and I moved back to St. Martin, and that happened so quickly. And with our brand and so on, it's now finding time between adulting, your 9 to 5, everything else that comes with it, and then SayLessSis. So
I think it takes so much to even be committed to a brand where you're like, I think this is important to me, and like hopefully other people will resonate with that. And clearly, like, that this is something that's so needed, because it's like it was an instant thing. Like, people recognize the value in that. And it just like it does take people that are just committed, because it's like a form of therapy for all of us to see our culture reflected. Like, it gives us something to call our own, you know what I mean? Which is like so I feel like we don't realize like how important that is, and I didn't realize it until I left and I was like, "Wait, nothing that I've loved that I thought like was mine, I can find anywhere here." Like I don't see it anywhere. And like even like when you guys did like the bush tea that you guys were selling, I was like, "Brilliant. Brilliant. Brilliant." I'm like, franchise that, bring that to America, put that in the stores. Like, I'm ready to go to, because I'm a tea drinker. And obviously, I would much rather drink bush tea because it's so good. It tastes fantastic. And I know where it is from, the culture that's tied to it, and like the health benefits of it. But we as a culture don't even like recognize the value in our little like modalities and thing, that like we see the value, and it's like it's like to me it was a no-brainer, and it's so inspiring to see our culture be like shown in this way, because it's like it's so like it gives me so much inspiration to think about other products, other ways of doing things that are so tied to just like what I have missed so much about being a St. Martiner, that like we just don't get it once you leave the island. And that's so amazing. I was jealous of the picnic, no lie. I was just like, y'all just gonna get together without me, like whatever.
Yeah, yeah, we had a lot of messages like that. We had, but it's something we really want to do here in St. Martin. That, and also, I mean, we have different ideas that we want to continue. But like again, it takes, like you mentioned, dedication, commitment, time. And at this point, I'm someone that believes it's not about like, oh, I don't have time, is making the time. And although you mean well, sometimes you just cannot find that time to be to make, So
I mean, you're young. Like, it's also like you young. You trying to figure out life. You trying to make some bread. Like, it's like people don't understand. Like, these are things that I feel like older people should have done for us, but they didn't. So we out here trying to fill a gap. You know what I mean? And make her quaint at the same time.
listen,
Like,
sis. Let's just say I'm tired. I'm tired. Like, oh my gosh, you just fit into the
you gotta
choir.
return to the sea. You gotta return to the sea and let her just take your stress away.
But
You
like
know
you
what I
mentioned,
mean?
for me, what keeps me going in everything that I do, like outside of SayLessSis, but just in everything I do, is like what you mentioned. Like I want that for anyone that comes after me to have it easier, to have something that they can recognize as their own, and not for them to go through any of the struggles I had to go through in regards to my identity, or in regards to, yeah, any of my negative experience that I've experienced so far. I'm not gonna say I've had a bad life, because that would be lying. But there were some things that could have been
I know. I'm
easily
like, we bless.
avoided.
We bless
Yes,
out here.
and I just want to make sure that, yeah, like for example, I have an 11-year-old brother. I want to, if he decides to go to Holland, that he can easily find a St. Martin community, um, and even if it's under the SayLessSis brand, like his sister left that legacy, like, okay, this is a place I could go to. I know I could find my people. We could have fun. I don't have to think about being lonely. I know it's easy for me to ask for help, and or certain questions about finances, things that you don't really trust people to ask, or he can have find that.
It's like, who do you go to? Like, who you go to in the Netherlands? It's like you have to figure it out. Like, even in America, I was like, I don't know. What is taxes? I have no clue. It'd have been lit to have a St. Martin to be like, sis, I got you. This is all you need. I got your back. Yeah, no. I think it's so important. Like we need that. Like we deserve that. And that's the thing. It's like for so long we've gotten accustomed to not having it, that we don't understand that like the things that we're asking for and we're creating are like the bare minimum. Like this is low hanging
Hmm.
fruit. Like we're not even thinking about like the big institutional changes that also need to be required. Like we're just doing the bare minimum so we could get by, like really and truly. You mentioned like this idea of struggling with your identity, and I'm curious, like, I guess, like, what struggles around your identity that you had as a Saint Martiner? Because I feel like I also struggle with my identity, but it was like coming from being mixed and like being a foreigner and like, well, foreign parents and all that jazz and different religions and all that tra la la. But it still is like that is a Saint Martiner, like all of
Yeah,
it.
I mean, okay, maybe struggle probably wouldn't be the fitting word for me, but I felt like I wasn't patriotic. Like I felt like I was not very patriotic about St. Martin or where I came from. And I felt like that kind of came with a bit of like insecurity as well. Like when, and especially in my first few years of Holland, if someone asked me about St. Martin, I felt like I always gave the most touristic answer. I was like, oh, the plane, the beach, those kind of things, and chicken leg and Johnny cake. I mean, we always give these like these touristic answers, which does not necessarily paint the picture of St. Martin or being a St. Martiner, and two, just I felt weird being in Holland and trying to integrate into a society that didn't really want to accept me as well. So it was like, okay, so I am just gonna go back to my own friends, and sometimes like, okay, but I want to meet new people. And I felt that kind of put a strain on my identity because, like, why am I trying to run away from my own people? Like, why am I trying to not engage in my own St. Martiners? And I felt like over the years, I realized, like, how much of that narrative was taught to so many of us that went away. Um, and I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a few bad apples that when you go away, you realize, okay, these are not my people. But for the most part, there are so many St. Martiners out there that are doing the damn thing. There is so much to learn from our own community. Like our human capital is amazing. Like the things that our people study and the jobs that they have and the things that they do on the side. Like we don't have to look elsewhere for this kind of we don't have to import anything. We have it within our own people. And I felt like it was really hard for me in the beginning to recognize that because I always felt like I needed to go to like this foreign place to find what we were missing at home when it was already within ourselves. So I would say maybe that was my struggle. In essence, is like not knowing that it
I
was within
relate.
me and within my community, and always seeking it elsewhere. And I really, and I again, like for me, I felt like Irma was like that turning point because when I saw the magic that me and all the fellow St. Martiners made with that musical chair event, and I told like Harsha, I legit was working with people that I would walk straight past, for the past 2 years being at university, or I didn't even know that they were a St. Martiner to begin with because they probably were like years older than me or whatnot. And the fact that we all came together, put everything aside, worked together. I mean, of course, there's a little ups and downs. Okay, I think this, you think that, but it worked out, and I'm so happy for that. And after that, I was like, our own people, can do these things. We can create so much magic within ourselves that we don't always have to seek it elsewhere. And I feel like especially growing up here, I felt like it was thought for us that we always have to seek better opportunities elsewhere when we got everything we need right here in St. Martin, man. Like we don't have to go far. You don't have to look too far. You don't. You really don't.
And it's weird. It's like I don't even understand why. Like they always like it's like interesting, like you said, like they always tell us like we have to leave, like we can't be great here, like you gotta go, like it's outside. And like when you learn world history, you're like, oh yeah, like these are all the great nations, and we have to go outside, and they have all the answers. And then it's like you go to these great nations all excited because you're like, finally, I'm free from all the oppression of my little island. I'm not going to be held back anymore. I'm in this like developed nation. It's going to be great. And then you look around and you're like, wait, this is a developed nation? What are they developed in? I'm like, I'm confused because I'm like, the infrastructure isn't on point. Their education is not on point. Their healthcare is not on point. Their relationship with each other is not on point. They got great culture or great marketing of culture. They're great story writers, great liars, great manipulators. But I'm like, what else? I'm like, I'm trying to understand, like, where I was like, where's the developed part? Because it seems to me like they've stolen everything, built off of that, and now they're like, "I don't wanna give it to you," or, "If you buy all the stuff that I stole from your country, you have to pay me a whole chunk of money and change," and it's like, but it's like, "I'm not gonna help you build the stuff in your country. No, 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 that's we can't do that. Imma just exploit your low wage, and exploit your natural resources, I'll exploit your ignorance, and I'll exploit your broken history that we broke low key, but we wrote that out of our history, and we'll just continue this, like, story that we're better than everybody else," and I'm like, "Seems to me like y'all destroyed everything that was once great and don't wanna be held accountable," and I'm like, accountability doesn't have to be a bad thing, it's just, like, accepting that you have made bad decisions and you can grow, like, that's a huge part of healing, but it's like, unless you accept your role to play, we're just gonna keep running in circles. Like, how is this conversation ever gonna get any better? I'm like, because you're not gonna admit fault. And I'm like, but it is you, though. Like, maybe it's not all of you, but some of y'all are up to some sus shit. Yeah, like you
And
guys
that's,
should do some
that's
reflection.
it's a pity because like I know so many people that live in the Netherlands that would love to leave and they would love to come back home. And I mean, I know, but I mean,
I feel it. It's like, why even stay there? I feel.
like especially now, like living back home for a couple of months, I'm like, Holland don't sound too bad some days, just for certain things when it comes to structure and whatnot. And then other days, like recently, I was speaking to someone and she was like, there comes a point when you move back home where you have to acknowledge that you lived the life you lived abroad, and then when you come home, you need to just recognize like, okay, this is your here and now, you just have to be present and make the best out of your situation here, else you're just going to continuously be comparing, and to be quite honest, it's not fair to you because then you will find an excuse and a complaint for everything that happens. But going back to my point, I wanted to mention about like so many people living in Holland and not liking it, I felt, and they try to stick it through because you're taught this narrative again that you need to go away, you need to
Yeah.
make sure that you have X, Y, and Z diplomas to be worthy, period. To be acknowledged, to prove that you went and do something. And whereas there's so many people abroad, like I was one of them, that you went through burnouts, your mental health goes to shit, you get a huge old debt that nobody trying to help you pay. So
Yeah, exactly.
at the end of the day, you sit down and it's like there's so many more pros and cons. But when you're young and you're not thought all of these things, or no one is there to look out for you, you just follow everyone that's doing it. And I feel like now, I mean, especially in my generation, I feel like a lot of us are recognizing that we recognize the effects of Holland, the narrative that was thought, and we're trying to repair and heal from our study experience over there. And I feel like Holland is not a bad place to study, but I feel like we've never been prepared enough for that community, for that society, and we don't look at it in the long term effect, especially for those of us now, like I'm gonna keep mentioning debt because that stays haunting me. Because especially when you're someone that like, okay, I have a financial plan, and there are certain things I want to accomplish, and you notice you have this one thing that holds you back. Like even recently, I started speaking to Sint Maarten is much more older than me, and a lot of them, like they're working and they have peers that are buying a house, and then they realize their peers are asking them, these are European peers, so their peers are asking them like, oh, but why haven't you bought a house yet? And they're like, well, I got debt, like I can't do it as yet. So you also feel again the insecurity, and you feel a bit behind for your age, because like, okay, I did all of this work, I studied just as much as you, but it's not equal, the ladder still isn't equal, because I still have to do so much more or wait so much more longer to get what I want, whereas for them it's much more easier. So I feel like those are conversations that were lacking in the begin with before we left. I feel like we were ill prepared in that regard. I felt like you mentioned from both ends, pure lies everywhere. And a lot of times when you bring up these critical points, and it's more so constructive criticism, yeah, everyone gets hostile, it's like, and I'm like, no, I'm just trying to
And
change
I'm like,
it,
we not trying to
like,
fight. Like I'm trying to find a way forward. Like I'm trying to find a way
yeah.
forward. Like I'm like, but we can't do that unless we talk. Like we need to talk about it. Like I don't understand. It's not like I'm trying to point fingers and be like, "Oh, I want you to feel like crap about what you did." No, I want you to be accountable. It's
Mhm.
different. Like and it's like again, it doesn't have to be so but it's like I look at my own like leaders and it's like I see what you're saying. Like there's so much stuff that we've had to deal with that limits our growth and we adapt these narratives that make us feel smaller than. But
Mm.
then I like look at us and it's like we are such like a visionary generation where we or like seeing the holes, you know what I mean? And it's like so interesting that I sometimes wonder like did we need to go through all of this crap for us to be like no more? No more. I'm done. I'm over it. I'm checked out. We need a new plan. We need to redesign this whole thing because I can't. I cannot function like this. Like this is not effective for anybody. Nobody, like no country in the world is like happy. You know what I mean? Like we have the richest countries with all this GDP and yet none of y'all are happy. All of y'all got problems. All your people are upset and miserable and confused and like distraught to the point where people in these developed countries are so depressed and sad that they rather die when there's people dying to get into their country in the first place. And it's just like, at what point are we going to be like, okay, let's step away, let's look at the situation from an unbiased perspective. Let's just put a pause in it. Let's all take a week off where we reflect on society. We look at how the chips have fallen and we are like, I don't know about this. I have a few points
Yes.
that I'm like maybe we should change things. Like I'm just saying, I'm like clearly it's just not. I'm like I don't understand. Like it's like we have this life and yet we're so bogged down by like yeah, like feeling bad about buying a house, you know what I mean? Or feeling bad about like taxes or feeling bad about like your income bracket. I'm like why are humans depressed about their income bracket? We should be depressed that we don't even know our earth. We're like our planet is so sick and like we don't even notice that she's sick and she's like trying to tell us like hello, I'm not feeling well, can we do something? And we're like, no, no, no. I just am gonna feel so bad that my tax bracket is not higher, or like, screw the government, and it's like all of this stuff that distracts us
Mhm.
from that truth of like why we're here and why we're alive. And like, we have this earth that gives us this paradise, like actual paradise for us to grow and learn and develop. And what are we doing? Killing each other? Like, seriously?
Yep.
I'm confused. I'm confused. I'm confused. I'm just like, it's not adding up. The mathematics is not. I'm
Math not mathing, sis.
like we need an economy that we keep filling with debt and we like pay it off through more debt. And I'm like, okay, but if it was my bank account with that much debt, you wouldn't give me the loan. But because it's so and so country with so and so military, they get the loan. Confused. I'm confused.
Yeah, sis.
That's literally all I can do is be like, "Ugh."
Right? I felt like this conversation was supposed to be like, woohoo! And we're just here sitting down like, shit. This is the world we live in.
No,
Like,
but it's
oh
okay
my
though.
god. Like,
Because I also feel in all of this, right? In all the chaos, in all the tralala, it can be hella depressing, 100%. We could really get sad about it. And a lot of people do. Like a lot of people really
mhm.
do. And that's why you see all these active shooters, because all these teenagers just don't understand life and they like, well, it don't mean nothing and so I'm gonna just kill everybody and end the misery. And I'm like, Brody, that's not how this works either. Like we can't. Not a viable solution. Okay. And this is really where I feel like Saint Martin can really help. Like I feel like people don't understand like my vision of Saint Martin, and I feel like you do, like because you see the value in Saint Martiners, and I feel like because we have been in this unique place where we have been like this observer to global development, and we've kind of been in the middle of all of this tra la la, and at the same time, like you have this immersion of diversity, like true diversity, not this fake shit that these great nations keep talking about. Because I was like, I had never heard of diversity and inclusion until I went to these great nations, and I was like, this isn't diversity or inclusion. So I don't know what you trying to pass off as fake diversity and fake inclusion, because this is not it. Like it sounds like segregation that you're masking as diversity, but okay, if it makes you feel good, I don't know what to tell you. But it's like St. Martin really and truly, I feel like can be this model for like how we can develop as a world. But like it takes St. Martiners stepping into that realization of the role that we can play in this global development that I think is so important. Because where else in the world are we going to meet people that are so different, literally on every dimension of being, on a 37 square mile rock? Where else? Like you don't see it. And it blows my mind that everybody comes to our little rock, because last time I checked, the history books say land of no utility.
Yep. Well, like my response to that, I feel like I agree, but I disagree. So, like me and Lisa have a I don't know if we said in a podcast, but I do know we had this discussion about St. Martin's and diversity. I totally agree that we are. I mean, like even attending St. Dominic High School, I remember there was an article I read or something that was mentioned that we had like 108 different nationalities in that little school alone. Imagine at St. Dominic High School. And I was blown away. I was like, shit, whoa, like where did these people come from? I felt like we were all like the same people, you know? I could be lying, or the number could have been lower, but I knew it was a large amount for the little people that we had. And but I remember me and Lisa like speaking because like Lisa is from like Guyanese background, and my background is of course Saint Martiner but also like Cursilinian as well. And I felt like with our different backgrounds we had a different even though we went like high school, we didn't go primary school there, but high school for them from at least from age 12 to 27 we've been together, so our experience have been somewhat the same. But one thing we have noticed is that as diverse as St. Martin is, we are extremely xenophobic. And I feel like on St. Martin, we don't acknowledge that truth as well. Like we're like, yes. And I mean, I sometimes I sit down and I love to listen to older heads. Like since I've been back, I find myself like around a lot of older people because for me it helps me understand why we are in a position we are in today. Like I love sitting and talking to my grandparents and anyone else I come across, and just some of the comments they make about certain people with backgrounds, or oh I don't understand why they do this and why they do that, or they point fingers like you mentioned, and it all goes back to the accountability word, word again. But I in that, just from listening to them, I'm like, wow, we are so xenophobic because they are so stuck on their one perception of what a St. Martiner is, which is you just born here, that's done. And sometimes I question my parents too, like based on their migration background, and like for my parents, they are St. Martiners, but then sometimes I easily hear people call them a different nationality, and I'm like, no, but they're St. Martiners. So the xenophobia is real here on the island. And I feel like, I mean, at least with the older generation, I feel now, again, I feel like our generation was like, whatever y'all taught us, we don't care. We're not taking it in, or we take it with a grain of salt. And we don't, like even like me and Lisa, we always like a lot of times like people talk down on Haitians. You grow up with like you say certain things that you didn't even realize that were so harmful to that community. Or people say like, oh, you know where they come from. these people come, they make a life here on this island, came to provide better for their children. They're doing the same thing that you as a St. Martiner tell us to do when we go to Holland, when we go to the States, when we go to Canada. And then you turn around and look down on them. And I'm like, how can you do this? Like, how do you, what's not clicking, Stephen? What's not clicking? Like, so so we have this conversation so often, especially with our background, because even with her having a Guyanese background, like she's told me her experiences of how people would label them just for being Guyanese, whereas me having a different background, I've never really experienced that, so that also helped me to see St. Martin and our demographic in a whole different light. So as much as we preach about diversity, I have to say that we still have a lot of work to do. And again, like you mentioned into like us being in, I feel even our location on Earth is such a unique placement. Like you mentioned, like when you were mentioning about, oh, look in here, like, oh, you see what's happening here, what's happening there, like we can literally do that, from our placement, like, oh, the US, the Europe, and I'm like, shit, like we legit dead in the middle somewhat, or we just could like be on the outskirts looking out, like, y'all making a mess over there, but we cool on this side of the world. Um, but again, I feel like, at least for me, what I've noticed too, like in my whole educational journey, is that the everything I've thought, I've learned to question, because they, again, goes back to history, but you always have to question the information that you're thought, because if not, you're going to easily take in these Western ideologies that cannot be applied to St. Martin. It simply can't. Like, we need to have our own unique roadmap of how we work. Again, and like you mentioned, from because of our location, our demographic, we cannot apply what happens in the Netherlands or what happens in the US to our tiny island. But what we can do is take bits and pieces from everywhere and create our own roadmap. Yeah, like especially when you get your education from abroad, you need to be able to take the bits and pieces that you get and create that own roadmap for St. Martin. You can't just take these the complete ideologies that you were thought to apply them here, 'cause it just would not work. And one thing I've noticed here in St. Martin is that when you come back with a certain vision, it doesn't usually align with the masses. When I've mentioned, like, oh, I'm coming back, a lot of people here are like, why? Like, be careful. You can't say certain things, and I'm like,
I hate that. I hate when people tell me that. Oh my gosh.
there have been so many people in history, Harsha, which is why I love, especially when we do like the Swaligans we stand, and just even the Black History Month. There have been people like, for example, this one lady, Leonidas Richardson. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. Like, she was going against everyone, standing up for her beliefs. I mean, it had some negative consequences, but sis was speaking her truth, and her children eventually came back to St. Martin. They have been able to contribute in many different ways as businessmen or even doctors and so on, and I feel like a lot of times too, when we have this culture, we like to say St. Martin is a democracy, but sometimes I feel like it's low key a little dictatorship, because why is it that we can't speak and say certain things? Why can't we challenge
An
certain people?
oligarch.
Like, why can't we do these things without the consequences of somebody messaging you or sliding in your DMs and telling you about you and your whole family, or bringing up something your grandfather did that you had nothing to do? Just example, never happened to me.
I'd be like, okay, and I feel you. I'm just like, okay, what's your point? Like, what I gotta do with me? Like, I don't care. Like, my parents still love me, and that's good enough. Like, I could care less. Like, so
That's something it has to change, especially the whole speaking out issue. I feel like, so many of us have so much to say, but you have to be strategic about it. And again, like, a lot of people may support what you say online, but leave it have to be in person, or you actually having the balls to go up there and say something. No one really has your back too. So sometimes you question, like, okay, what am I fighting for? If I'm not getting the support. And I mean, some things I do, I don't look for the support, but at the same time, it's nice to know you have a little allies to help you reach the goal that you're looking to reach. So
I feel that's why like I've like been so focused on building my financial freedom abroad that like I know if they were ever to come to me with that, like, oh, well, blah, 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 I'm gonna be like, you literally have no control or effect on my ability to thrive and be successful. So, like, I have the freedom to be critical of you because my future is not in your hands. So it's like I don't care. Like I think it's ridiculous that like people want to shun people for speaking the truth. It's like why are we trying to protect people that need to be held accountable for their actions? Like you are part of maintaining the status quo that I am trying to break. You know what I mean? Like I need you to do the inner reflection as to why do you feel responsible in protecting someone who has never protected you. Like I don't understand. And like even coming back to the xenophobia, like that's literally been the struggle of my life. Like I remember my mom used to tell me like people would call me the little Indian girl because I was, half Indian and like these were things like when my mom would tell me that I was like, well, damn, like for real. And she was like, yeah, like people would literally say that about you. And I would be like, ouch. And it's like even just like the way I've heard people like refer to my father, like when they would come into our store when my father is providing a service and like the way they would talk to him, it would be so disrespectful. And I was just like, what the hell is wrong with you? But I think like through all of that, like and I agree, like, because we have these issues of xenophobia, despite being a massively diverse, like, little rock, I think that's why we are the perfect lesson. Because it's like when we try to figure out how do we tackle these issues of like stereotypes and generalizations and identity, wouldn't it be perfect to do that in a country that has all of those issues and like if you can find a solution that can apply to such a small community then that can be scaled to the rest of the world because like oftentimes when you look at like a lot of these socialist countries a lot of the time they can do that because their populations are like homogenous, you know what I mean, like the Scandinavian countries are pretty homogenous. But when you go to more diverse countries you realize like these sentiments of xenophobia show up. And it's interesting, I think like St. Martin can be a great example is trying to understand like where these ideas of xenophobia really are rooted. And I think a lot of it has to do with the narratives that we're taught. Just like being a part of this like colonialized and capitalist framework of being like a lot of these people that like have these opinions of foreigners are largely because they were taught to hate them because they looked at it as like these people are taking something from me. And that's not the case at all. And it's like again, like I remember I forgot who mentioned it. It might be in one of my podcasts. But there was like this example of when Marcel Gums referenced like our relationship with Venezuela in the past and how they had helped St. Martin so that St. Martin could thrive. But then when Venezuela was going through its own like civil issues, St. Martiners did not want to accept Venezuelan refugees. And it was largely because we have forgotten our history and we've forgotten the partnerships that we've made with other communities. And like the fact that we're all migrants, like, and that's the thing that to me, like, that is what binds St. Martiners is that we're all other. We're all from other parts of the world. We're all on this land of non utility. Not because we wanted to be there. Some of us, we left because we were like opportunity, but we just all happen to be here because of a lot of different factors in like the global development. And it's like, okay, now that we're here, what can we do to build a community that we know will be better because we can see like the way of the world is not working, it's falling apart, and we can be a part of like having those conversations, being brutally honest, being vulnerable about the issues that we have in our community so that when we heal and we grow, that can be a lesson to the rest of the world. And instead of it being like, this can be our way of like contributing to the global history of creating a path forward for society, because it's like, we desperately need one. We desperately do, because otherwise, these psychos gonna bomb us all to death. And it's like, that's not the way I'm trying to go out, like it's not the game I'm trying to play. Like,
Yep. I totally agree with you, Harsha. I have nothing to rebuttal. No, no, no. I totally agree. I totally agree with it. But I mean, I have hope. Like, especially with our generation, I have so much hope. Like the fact that you mentioned, like you working on financial freedom to be sure that when you do take up that mantle of having that critical voice, and challenging that, you came up with your strategic plan, and for me, I support that 1,001%. I feel like there are so many other St. Martiners that also has that mindset. I think even recently on Twitter there was this whole discussion between St. Martiners about who's going back, or why you should go back, or why you shouldn't go back, and who was criticizing who. I honestly did not have the time to really follow up on it, but I knew there was like a spaces talk about it as well. But I really wish I had the opportunity to sit in and just listen to some of the opinions of people that moved back and the people that stayed away, and how they can also contribute to St. Martin from abroad. Because a lot of times, like, I think one of the arguments were that St. Martiners that stay away, they can't really have a say in what's going on because they're not here. And then they were like, no, that's not true. I can still contribute in one way or the other. And people don't realize that when you're abroad, you're an ambassador for St. Martin. Like, there were so many different arguments that were going on. I was like, oh, that's true. That's also true. There's different fruits in one thing, So, and I feel like that's a conversation that should continue to be held or have, whatever the word is right now. I'm so tired. But it's something that I like the fact that, especially in our generation, that we are able to share those different opinions and not like go down, cut each other throats for it. Like, you have this opinion, I have this opinion. We create a space, literally. I felt that was so healthy to create a space and talk about this with many different people, and at the end see people be like, wow, I really enjoyed this discussion. Maybe it changed their perspective on things, or they gain more insight as to, or made them reflect as to why they are even where they are now in life. Maybe it might encourage them to even go back home, for those that were saying that they were abroad. So I'm just saying, like, I have so much hope. I'm so proud of our generation. I love that we are challenging things, and even those younger than me, like, they have no filter. I feel like with us, we still have a bit of a filter, but those younger than us are like, listen, what is a filter? We just speaking our truth right now.
Yes. 100%. 100%. It's weird, like, it's, like, weird because it's, like, when you have a filter, like, that's censorship, like, that is literally a form of, like, censorship, of telling people what they can and can't say, and I think, like, that's so weird, like, I'm like, "Why would you, like, why can't people have an opinion, and, like, why can't you not agree and it, like, just be okay?" Like, I don't understand why it has to come back to something that affects your whole life because you have a thought that you're trying to understand. And it's like, yeah, I definitely feel so much in like just your story cuz like I too used to just not have no patriotic pride, just did not care and it's like 360, 360.
Right, girl. Everywhere I go, I'm like, yes, I'm from St. Martin. Like, even because of like SayLessSis and the slangs, I'm like, listen, when I go into rooms, or when I used to work like in the Netherlands, first I would like speak standard English because I get it. You need to understand me. But then at one point, I'm like, listen, these are my slangs. I'm gonna speak like this, and you're gonna learn to understand me the same way I learned to understand you. You're gonna learn, and it's not that hard. And you don't have the right to say, oh, well, it's uneducated. No, 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 no. We're all gonna speak this. And some of them, I'm like, oh yeah, eventually they understand me, that I no longer had to code switch. Of course, sometimes I do it because I was raised to code switch in certain settings, and it's really hard to unlearn. But overall, I'm like, listen, this is what kunumunu means. So when you hear me say kunumunu, you did something that I did not like or something, But yeah, it's yeah,
It's weird that like our like St. Martin English is deemed as like illiterate. Like that's the thing that I feel like is still sort of like this colonial perception of like language that we have that's like really weird. And even like me, like I think it took me a minute to just like change my perspective around just the use of language and like how language is really a means for us to communicate ideas using our vocal cords. And like humans have created infinite number of different ways to communicate and describe our reality, and it was only through this colonial lens that we say that some languages are civilized and other ones are not civilized. And it's like people experiment with language all the time. That's why we have slang across the world, across languages. It's because people are experimenting with the way that we speak, because the ideas that we need to represent in our modern world are different than the ideas from the past. You need to create new language to represent that. And I think it's weird that, like, because we're so accustomed to English, which was a British, enforced mandate as they civilized the world, right? We then, for some reason, felt that if you didn't speak English, then that meant you weren't intelligent or that you weren't able to actually create. And I have seen language be this thing that's been a tool for one, misinformation, because people can use language to completely like delude people. And then they use it as like this way to like be a gatekeeper for like experience or discussion. And it's like, just because you don't understand the words that I'm using to convey this idea doesn't mean that my way of conveying the idea was wrong. It just means that you need to expand your knowledge of language to understand my usage of it. And I think most times people are so lazy and entitled to their way of doing things that they're like, no, I don't want to have to learn your language because English is the language. And it's like, no, 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 no. We were forced to speak English because if we didn't, we would have been killed. So that's why we all speak English. Let's get the facts straight. Like, yes, it has benefited us, but again, forced upon us, not by choice. Okay. And now all of our institutions uphold that because it's easier to just go with the flow than to completely go back to whatever language it was we were speaking before, because they erased all of our connection to that information. So how would we know? You know what I mean? Like, and those are the things that make me so upset. Because it's like the erasure of culture, the erasure of experiences of minorities and islanders, I feel like is something that has been for so long just like not even brought up and articulated. And it's like through that erasure of experiences that you erase people, like you actually erase the lives of people. And it's like you cannot do that when like this whole experience is a collective experience. And it's one of the reasons why it's hard to really understand history when like the history that we have has been captured through the lens of a select few people, and it's not the collective history. It's the history written by the victor, which is a very, very, very skewed history. Very skewed. And like that's why like I remember in the parliamentary debate that they had like a while back, Sarah was mentioning that like, oh, like our history is in the Netherlands, like we just have to go to the Netherlands to get our history. And I was like, you think they wrote an accurate representation of our history? Like, really and truly? You think they documented all the slaves that the British brought? You think they documented all the abortions that were illegally carried out because of, instances of sexual assault against slavery on the island? You think they wrote about all the people that were beaten? No, they didn't write about any of that. And that is our history. That is a part of our narrative. That's a part of our identity. But why would they document the pain? Why would they document the exploitation? Like, who does that benefit? It doesn't benefit them, it benefits us. And I just thought like it was funny that we often say like we need to go to these great nations to get our history. And it's like they never even wrote our history. They didn't care to write the history. It was easier and in their best interest to erase that part of the book. And it's like, I don't know. It's like this weird thing. And it's like, okay, I'm trying to understand the world, but the world doesn't even reflect the truth. And it's like, how do you navigate that when you're trying to define your identity, but so much of it has been erased and there's like literally nothing you can do to get that back? And I feel like that's the pain that I feel like when I think about like white privilege, I think about the privilege of being able to really know your history, to go to Ellis Island and see your name in that book and to be like, that was my uncle and my grandpa, and he came from Ireland and they worked on a potato farm that grew blah, 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 blah. I don't have that. Like, we don't have that. And it's like, that is the thing that I feel like people don't understand the pain. Like, that is a pain. You know what I mean? That's an ancestral pain. And it's like, I wish people would just understand the humanness of that. Like, not even to say like the bloodshed and everything, like, just understand the humanness of that privilege. It's like if you can understand that, then it's like, okay, then we can have better conversations around this. Cause it's not, I'm not trying to make like them feel bad. I just want them to understand like you took something that I will never get back. And like that hurts. And I have a right to cry about that. And you can't be upset that I'm crying about that when you're the one that was responsible for that. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah.
Deep breath, Harsha, deep breath. But I totally resonate with everything that you mentioned. It's, and just going back to, I feel like what you mentioned about, Sarah saying that our history is in the Netherlands. Ugh. I have so much to say, but what I can say, and to those people that are listening now, is that cherish your elders. There is so much history here. There is so much history within your family. Like sometimes I sit down and I list. My grandfather's making 90 next week. God bless. And the fact that this man can sit down and from since I was young, he's been telling me so many stories, Harsha, about the times when where because he was like born in French Quarter where there were only two cars, and he know who the two cars were for, or about recently I found out, like I was going through some old documents of him and he was telling me about when you're born, usually in the hospitals you just write your name there and then. So yeah, so like with my grandfather, like I learned so much history through him. Like usually he would tell me like these old time stories of like these creatures that would live in the bush that would come out at night, like stories that you can't learn from Holland. You can't just learn these things. But one interesting thing that he was telling me, which I didn't know, was that back then, because again, he's making 90, so imagine how long ago that was. Here in St. Maarten, he was born on April 1st. But back then, when you make a baby, your parents will literally tell someone that's going to Marigot, like, hey, when you go Marigot, tell them this child born, and then they would go and they would like write this child name, but they sometimes would ask, they would put the last name of whoever and wrote your name in Marigot. So like example, his dad, for example, had a whole different last name because the person that went to report his birth was not his father. So there's like, that's why too in our history there's like so many different last names, and then you have to get someone to change your last name. And two, I found out like I was going back to the point, like my grandfather was born on April 1st, and I read a document that said April 6th. I was like, hey, you celebrate your birthday like a week early? He's like, no, that's the day they went to report my birth, but it just wrote it as he was born on April 6th. I was like, what is this? So it's so crazy. And I feel like that is part of our history, just the way of how people used to communicate, and the processes that we had. Um, I find it so crazy, and it's so going back to like England, like at least here in St. Martin, like my grandfather being born on the French side, there's so many things in French that I was like, why are we taught French? Like so I can like read these things properly or understand them better, because now I just know stupid old English. It is not helping me right now. Besides reading names, so it's like all of these things. Is like I take pleasure in sitting down and listening to my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, because just their oral stories has taught me so much more about my St. Martin identity than any book out there, And I think that's something that, especially here, I noticed there's been a disconnect between the older generation and us in terms of like making sure those stories stay alive, making sure certain customs stay alive. Because I feel like too a lot of times you get into a generation and you feel you better than the younger generation because they don't know what they're doing, or they're being a little too wild and whatnot. Whereas y'all were doing it, sometimes you sit down and you listen, it's like y'all doing the same thing we do, and we just doing it in a different manner probably, or we just trying to do it a bit more strategically. But at the end of the day, a lot of us are fighting for the same goal that you were fighting for back in your day. So for me, I and that's one thing to whoever is listening to this podcast, like really take the time out to sit down and honor your elders. I know a lot of them has some mentalities or ideologies we still can't get over, but the stories that they have, you can learn so much from. Like you can learn so much about yourself, just the way of life in St. Maarten, because I feel like that's something we miss. I feel like the way how St. Maarten has been, even me being away for like 3 years before coming back home, was like, whoa. There was like, for me, it was a huge change. Like, whoa, all of this happened. Like, a lot of different things keep moving, going so fast. It's hard to keep up. And in St. Maarten, like, if you don't involve yourself enough in like the politics, out there, what's going on, you can easily be left behind. So you really have to be an active citizen when it comes to ensuring that you have all the information out there about St. Martin and being able to make that change. So yeah, that's my little 2 cents.
Very valid. Very valid. Very valid. I guess like how can folks like connect with you and like all the amazing things that you're doing in the community and like follow Say Less This as you guys continue to put on amazing events and like share the culture with the world, because the gram didn't have it before y'all, and I feel like you guys have inspired just so many people, and like you inspire me to just continue to have these conversations, because like for me this is healing. Like it helps me just understand myself better. It makes me feel more empowered and like just more, well, like less alone, you know what I mean? Because it's like this is our community. Like this is who we are. And like I just feel so lucky to have been around you like in my youth so that we can continue like build just like this incredible community of people that want something better for the world. Cause it's like if we don't do it, then like it's just never gonna happen. And it's like, well, I'd rather be a part of the change than continue to bitch about it, you know?
Yeah, so how people can reach out to me is through SayLessSis. Feel free to follow, like, share suggestions. Also know that some of our content too has also been inspired by our people for our people. So if you have an idea, if you want to see something that's represented, please feel free to slide in our DMs. Like especially when it comes to our slangs, like so many people literally would remember a word and DM us and tell us like, "Oh my god, I thought of this. Did you do this word?" So please do not be a stranger to us. Like we are always open to new ideas, especially because again, like I mentioned, what we share is our reality, and we know that that's just a small part of the many different realities that people experience on St. Martin. And if we are a platform that say we represent St. Martin, we should be able to be open-minded enough and to welcome everyone's experiences, thoughts, opinions of how you feel about what's going on in St. Martin or what you would like to be shown, and so we welcome anybody, please. You don't have to feel a type of way. We really are not those type of people to pitch your ideas, and if we could make it a reality together with you as well, um yeah, slide in our DMs, send us an email. It's connected. And for me, you could follow me on Instagram. I'm at Deshante. It's my middle name, so if you just type that in, you'll find me, or Shanica Romney. Um, you should be able to find me on Instagram, LinkedIn. If you ever need help with anything, if you want to brainstorm, if you need to network, to reach out to somebody, I'm always here. I'm a listening ear. So reach out to me. And also to Harsha. I feel like what Harsha mentioned about, we met in Teen Times and then there was like this whole gap, and then shout out to social media because we just started talking like in DMs, and then I literally just just went happening in the DMs. I was like, oh my god, I love Harsha. Like, where has Harsha been? Like I felt like I don't know, man. But we need. I feel like that's something that needs,
She was
huh?
out. She had disappeared.
No, but
And I was like, she was gone. She was just like, I'm struggling in college.
that I yeah, but that's something I try to incorporate too. Like, there's some people I legit would be like, I slide in a DM and I make conversations. It's not sometimes to be uh like in puppy mental they say like to be familiar, like, you know, like too extroverted, because I'm not that person. But it's just good to connect in a way, like, hey, like, you look, even if small, something small, like, hey, you look nice today, like a picture you posted, or what's going on, and just keep it short, you know. That's something I've been intentionally trying to do, and also try to do it outside of my friend group as well, because you have to maintain those relationships, you know. And again, sometimes we feel like people only reach out just when they need something. But at least for me, if you feel like, hey, Shanika may be the person for this, and be able to help, I'm always here, you know. That's just the type of person I am. And I have to say a great thank you to Harsha, because last year Harsha sent me a link for this fellowship. And I was like, girl, I don't know. But either way, I did it, and I signed up and I got accepted to the fellowship. So I'm really, really happy, because without Harsha, I wouldn't have known anything about this fellowship. And you know, and just her sending a link saying, hey, I thought of you, you fit this. It opened so many different doors for me, you know. So that's something eventually people will be hearing about soon.
Aw.
And I hope to really share my
I'd be
journey.
forgetting that I even did that.
Yeah, Harsha, you be out here being a good Samaritan. So yeah, I just want to
I
say
was like,
thank you
wait,
to
what
her.
fellowship? And then I was like, oh yeah, that thing.
Yeah, yeah, because she was like, I'm too young, but I think you're of age, so you can do it. I was like, okay, thanks. So, you know, we need more of that, you know, if you
Yeah, because I
recognize,
was like, I felt like SayLessSis fit perfectly.
yeah, I'm definitely, I think next week they're supposed to be officially announcing it. So then, yeah, I'll be speaking more about that and just see where it goes. But again, thank you, Harsha.
It's
Again,
awesome.
I'm
I'm
up.
so proud of you.
I was about to say I'm
Proud of
proud of
you for like
you.
taking it and going with it.
Yeah.
We're proud of each other, okay? Greatness uplifts greatness, you know.